Hi, this is Jean Maroney of Thinking Directions, and today I'd like to tell you something about my view on the role of self-understanding in achieving ambitious goals. Now, the reason self-understanding is relevant is that whenever you commit to a goal, in theory, you need to commit to the totality of the effort that is going to be required to achieve that goal. I say in theory because although it makes perfect logical sense, right? One of the things you need to do when you're setting a goal is you say, if you're only going to go halfway, if you're not going to put in all the effort, you shouldn't set the goal because that would then be wasted effort, or at least this is the top-down logical thinking. So that's how you figure out whether this goal is important enough to set. If you don't have the time to do it because other things are more important, then you wouldn't set this goal. But although that sounds really good in theory, it's a little bit incomplete because in practice, you really don't know what the totality of the effort is going to be. So how do you commit to an ambitious goal when you don't know what the totality of the effort is going to be? Well, for that, you need a goal-setting process that really takes into account this real-life fact. And to start with that, I think it might be helpful to talk about, well, what is the totality of the effort? I think people get confused about the totality of the effort in a couple of ways. The simplest one is that they only think about how hard it is to come up with the idea. They don't think about the effort in execution. So there are a lot of times you can come up with like the solution to a problem, like or take, for example, getting out of debt, which is a goal that a lot of people set and then have difficulty following through on. And it's so, say they get the idea, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to just cut my weekly spending or stop using a credit card, or, just there are a lot of different tactics you can use. And there's a lot of good advice out there. But suppose you say I'm going to cut my spending each week. Well, can you actually do that? I mean, what is involved in executing on that? For example, it probably means that you need to plan your grocery trip, which I don't plan my grocery trips. Do you plan your grocery trips? Actually figure out what you're going to buy and check all the prices? I'm fortunate enough that I don't need to do that. But if you're on a budget, you really need to do that. I remember my mother doing that when we were young. There were 3 grocery stores in the town I grew up in, and we went to one of them just to buy eggs because the eggs were cheaper there. Now, right now, eggs are very expensive, so you may know where the cheapest eggs are. But it's something that unless you're very budget conscious, you don't know. So actually executing on spending less money is not trivial. The idea is really easy, and you can say, oh, this would be good, and this, you can even think this would be a good idea, and yeah, I'm spending a lot of money that is not, I don't really need to spend. But to actually execute, and in every one of those decisions, spend the money when it makes sense and don't spend the money when it doesn't make sense, that executing on that is not a trivial thing. So that's one error that people make, is they don't think about the executing on it. The other error that I focus on a lot in my work is they don't focus on the fact that you may actually need to do some self-development to achieve this goal. So in the case of getting out of debt, you probably realize you need to develop some new processes, and you may need to change your relationship with money. There's a lot of people will give you advice on this. So you realize there's some self-development, and you might actually go into the process with some journaling tasks and other things so that you can actually work through it as you go. But a lot of times people don't even realize there's self-development work involved. And a good example of this is when the Peter Principle, the Peter Principle, this is the idea that people get promoted until their level of incompetence. And what this is they found things to be easy. I mean, this is really common. Engineers getting promoted to be managers of engineers, which is really a new skill set. It's a people skill set. And it really is a different kind of job. And you can be very good as an engineer and terrible as an engineering engineering manual. What happened to my voice? What happened to my words? You can be good as an engineer and terrible as an engineering manager. I know I held such a position for about 6 months when I was an engineer. And I talked with my boss and we agreed I was kind of marginal. He said I was just barely did the job adequately. And we agreed maybe I should be a project manager, which I was good at. I was just not that great a manager of a functional manager. And I wasn't interested in doing that. That particular job would have required a development of my own values to want to be a better people manager. And when you decide to get out of debt, you kind of commit to having a new relationship with money and a new relationship with spending. But sometimes people get promoted not realizing that they're going to actually need to change some of their values. If you want to be a technical manager, you need to value the people relationships over the solving of the technical problems. And it might have seemed like a good idea with a salary increase, but I've coached people on this. I can think of one person in particular who was really pretty miserable. And with my coaching, he eventually figured out, yes, I do not want to learn these skills. And so he became much more of like a chief technology officer rather than a technology manager, because he wanted to solve hard technical problems. So, which doesn't mean you can't make that transition. I think sometimes the Peter Principle makes it sound like there's a level of incompetence you're going to get to, and that's it, too bad. And now that's something I really disagree with. I think if the goal matters to you, like if you want to be eventually, say, a CEO, and you started out technical, and one of the steps in that is to become a functional manager, you need to develop those skills, and you can develop those skills, and it requires learning new things, it requires implementing new habits, and it requires changing your values. You literally have to become more interested in the people part and the communication part of the process, or else you will not succeed. And those are learnable skills, but it takes a real commitment to do that. And more than that, it takes a certain objectivity about yourself to really know what knowledge you have and what you don't, what skills you have and where you're kind of incompetent, and what values you hold and what you don't care about, and what your old baggage is, which is totally distorting. Like for a long time, I have this much less. I had a kind of conflict aversion. I just tried to avoid conflict. And of course, that totally doesn't work. That was an anti-value that I had. And now it's just, I'm still learning these skills. I'm better at it. There's still some areas where I'm not as good at it, but it's something that I have become much, much, much better at, not running away from conflict and handling conflict in a more constructive way. And that's another topic. But the reason I was able to do that is because I was able to observe, actually understand what I could do, what I couldn't do, what I knew, what I didn't know, what I seemed to care about versus what I was wildly afraid of, and what I didn't care about. And I was able to motivate myself by a conscious process to set goals and develop those. I basically was able to do self-development as part of pursuing goals. And that's what you really need. That's what makes the Peter Principle not relevant. It's uncommon because you can't just introspect your level of ability. There's some things you can do and there's some things you can't do, and that feels like normal to you. And one way you can tell this is that if there's something that's easy for you to do and then other people can't do it, it's like, what's wrong with them? Why can't they just do that? And there's always an explanation for why the other person is appearing incompetent at something that you think is easy. There's some history that you have that has made that easy, that you've learned the right things, you've trained your mind in a certain way. And the fact that they can't do it means that they haven't had that same training. It's a lot of times people think it's willful, and it's usually not willful. One of the most important things I've learned about dealing with conflict is to not assume that when someone does something, they're doing it intentionally, as opposed to through ignorance or error or lack of skill or a different set of values than you have, which really helps a lot with interpersonal conflict. But I needed to learn that. Some people say, oh yeah, that's obvious. Okay, it wasn't obvious to me. And I think that part of the reason I've been so successful is I'm going to dub myself the queen of self-criticism in the best possible way, because I can criticize myself and then say, okay, that's a problem. What are we going to do about that? I don't take it personally in some way. I'm able to be actually kind of hypercritical and yet not have that stop me. Now, I'm not saying be hypercritical, but for people like me who are pretty critical, it's very helpful to know how to turn that into, in effect, constructive information that can just move you forward. It's also helpful to learn that if you're very self-critical, you're probably very critical of other people too, and that doesn't work so well in interpersonal relationships. That's one of the things I got to learn. They talk about this a lot. Your superpower also has some blinders associated with it. This is a case where I had some blinders associated with, I could take criticism, and other people, that properly, let me just say properly, do not respond well to criticism, unsolicited criticism. Okay, I'm a little off topic, but you get the idea. Self-understanding is not something that you just get. You have it's not that you have blinders, or even biases. Those both make it sound like they're built in. It's that as you develop in a certain way, certain things become easy and you don't need to think about them. And so you're just not that self-aware of them unless you really take some extra attention to figuring out, well, what can I do and what can't I do? And how did I get so I could do this? And how could I learn to do this better? And I'll tell you, the way that you find out that the limits of your knowledge and the limits of your skill and the limits of what you care about, how strong your values are really, is usually by some kind of setback or failure, which is not very fun, which gets to the self-criticism issue, but which means that you need to be able to see that in terms of, oh, okay, I understand myself better. If I want to do this, I need to develop some new skills. Okay, I've gotten a little bit off topic. That can sound a little daunting. Let's get back to the original topic, which is, how do you commit to an ambitious goal? Because you need to commit to the totality of the effort, but you probably don't know the totality of the effort. So here's how I solve this problem with my goal setting process. The key thing is key results. Now, I use the term key results because I think this is related to the OKR methodology, the objectives key results methodology, which is popular in a lot of entrepreneurial circles. I teach it a little different way because I teach everything in my own way. But most OKR processes, they'll recommend that you have, say, 5 to 7 key results in a quarter. What I teach is that a key result is something you are morally certain you can get done in 2 weeks or less. You're morally certain you can get it done in 2 weeks or less. That's not with suddenly you never have to check email or go to a meeting. That's given your schedule, and the best is given your schedule for the next 2 weeks. You are morally certain you have enough time to get this task done. That's a key part of a key result, and that's about the same number of them in a quarter that the normal OKR process does. Objectives, I think, are something that takes 1 to 3 months, and they say you can have 1 to 3 of those in a quarter. That's 1 to 3. So that's how I teach it. I teach it a little bit differently. I think it's completely compatible, but it lets me make this point. That key result needs to really be a result that moves you materially toward your objective. I spent a lot of time coaching people. They say, oh, my 2-week goal is to put in 16 hours on this. That's not a result. 16 hours time on task is not a result. What do you actually think you're going to get done? What are you morally certain you think you're going to get done in 2 weeks? Now, if you're like trying to get out of debt, you can figure out a result. Like you can set as a result that my grocery bill for 2 weeks is under a certain amount. And then you can work hard to make it be under that amount. I'm just, trying to get concretize here, right? That is a result. You can actually tell what your grocery bill is at the end of 2 weeks. And that's a small enough time scale. I got this 2-week rule I got from Bob Fugate, my mentor, when I was still an engineer. He said he looked around at all of us working on this project we were working on, and he commented, when I ask people how they're doing or when it's going to get done, if they tell me 2 weeks or less, or under 2 weeks, it's probably going to get done really very soon. But if they tell me 2 weeks or more, it means they don't know. I think this is I don't want to canonize this as like a psychological fact, but there's something about how far in the future you can envision and hold as hold in mind the complexity of all the things you need to do. I mean, and it's amazing sometimes. I say, oh yeah, I can get this done in 2 weeks. And then I look at the calendar and I realize I have a 3-day trip in the middle of that 2 weeks. There's no way I'm going to get it done in 2 weeks. I mean, you need to actually hold in mind the reality of what is going to happen in these 2 weeks. And that is sufficiently complex that, for the most part, you can do it for less than 2 weeks. But starting at about 2 weeks, it becomes very difficult to do. Now, if you can do it for longer, congratulations. I applaud that. Write a book. Explain to me how you do that for longer. Probably you do it because you have experience doing this kind of thing. I know someone who's actually very good at longer range planning of projects, and that's what it is. He can base things on his experience. But sometimes you're doing something that's never been done before. And this key results of the 2-week rule for key results, very, very helpful, because then you're taking advantage of all that implicit knowledge you have, all of that implicit knowledge you have of your skill and of your values. Like if you think, oh God, if I try to do this in 2 weeks, I'm not going to want to do it. It's going to be hard because of this, and this. You've just identified some motivational issues that are actually part of the problem and need to be built into your first 2-week key result. Somehow that first 2-week key result needs to handle these motivational issues. So for example, if you were going from being a hotshot technical person to a technical manager, say that your 2-week goal was to have an onboarding interview with every member of your team. I'm just making something up here, right? I just, that would be a good thing. Find out what all your team members' goals are and how it relates to the company. If you want to be a functional manager, that would be a very good thing to learn. And that's kind of a little common sensey. But suppose when you look at that, a couple of things. One is, suppose let's say there's 6 people on your team. We're just trying to concretize here. And you say, okay, they'd each be a half an hour. So that's 3 hours. And then you look at your schedule and you think, you say, oh yeah, sure, that's enough. I can fit that in. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, you didn't do it. You say, well, what happened? Well, you thought it was only 3 hours, but there's also at least, say, a half an hour of overhead of just scheduling the 6 meetings. It's not, electronic calendars help with this, but there still is some time involved in scheduling meetings. And there's also time involved in preparing for meetings. Like, what are you going to talk about? And if you don't know what you're going to say, like to open the meeting and what questions you're going to ask, you're actually going to hesitate to schedule the meetings, or you're going to cancel them. I guarantee this. And this is the kind of thing that you don't know until you try to schedule the meeting, and then you're like, oh no, I'm not quite ready to schedule them yet. I need to think about that. And then you get caught up doing some kind of technical work or doing something else or attending some training or who knows what. Well, that actually is critical information. When you fail on a key result that you were morally certain you could do in 2 weeks, you learn a tremendous amount from the post-mortem, right? Oh yeah, I didn't want to do it because I needed to think about that. Yeah, what am I going to do in these meetings? Oh boy, I need to actually figure that out. I didn't realize that I needed to put time in that. So one of the things is if you find something that you didn't schedule time for. Another thing is perhaps you have that raises some baggage, some doubts, or it raises some things that you actually need to learn from the people who are mentoring you to become a functional leader. There are all kinds of things that you learn, and what you learn is very idiosyncratic. It's very individual, is maybe a better word. It depends on your knowledge, your skills, your values, your fears, and your willingness to, in effect, commit to what you're going to get done in 2 weeks that is actually going to have a payoff. That's what lets you commit. If you have a process where you know every 2 weeks you're going to really get some kind of payoff, then it's much easier to commit to a long-range goal. Because one of two things is going to happen. You're going to either get that payoff, or you're going to develop the clarity about what's involved in this job or in this task or in this goal, whatever it is, in order to succeed. And there are times when you discover 6 months in, I've done this on a number of books. The first book I worked on it for, well, it's actually, I've had a lot of great ideas for books. I was thinking the second book that I worked on for a little over 2 years. And really it's a book on concretization, which I will sometime write. And I got to a point where I realized, oh my God, I was trying to break new ground in epistemology. I thought, this is not appropriate for a first book. And I agree with that. I still agree with it. That was not appropriate. The goal, the book that I wanted to write was too ambitious, certainly for where I was. This was over 20 years ago. And so I pivoted on that goal. But because I had been working in a way where I really made progress, I had drafts, I had synopsis, I had outlines, I had in-depth drafts. I really got something accomplished each 2 weeks of those 2 years that I worked on it. And that has served me well. The things that I learned in working on that book are actually part of what's making it possible for me to write the book that I'm working on right now. So I really did feel that effort paid off. And the learning that I got from realizing, oh, I see this really is too ambitious for where I am now, also helped me eventually figure out what a more reasonable scope for a book was. I actually have had to figure that out by trial and error. That has been a very difficult problem for me. My eyes are very big, bigger than the plate. But I think I have actually figured that out. Anyway, the point is that if you have this approach, which I teach, I've got a freebie on set goals that motivate, and I coach this in my launch program. People come in with these really ambitious goals, and I help them figure out how to turn that into 2-week key results that they can get. Ideally, they will get 4 of those done in 8 weeks, and 4 key results is definitely a major achievement. In fact, even 2 key results can be a really major achievement if you set the goals right. But that ensures that the effort you put in is going to pay off. And oh my God, that is really important for motivating you to achieve the goal. So if you'd like to know more about this, you should check out my free webinar on set goals that motivate, and maybe join me in the next launch. Thank you. This is Jean Maroney of Thinking Directions.